we're all working in the tech support department. We may not have signed up for this consciously, but think about it. Aren't you somebody's tech support? And maybe a young person you know or an older person you know is your tech support, and then we are each other's. Is it just me? I feel as if I am employed by multiple companies as a tech.
I think for better and worse, I am my family's tech support. And I say that, like, I installed the mesh network in my house. Whenever there's a problem with the internet, my kids come running to me. What did you do? I'm like, I do not provide the internet. I just make it accessible for you.
What did you do?
Like, what did I do? I'm just going to have to call the service provider like everybody else and schedule a visit because the internet's not working.
You are to blame, Miriam. I feel that this should be in your bio. You are, you might not make the tech work, but when it doesn't, that's when this is what I tell my kids. I'm like, when it's succeeding, it's silent, it's invisible to you. It's the opposite of a casino. All my wins are invisible. Oh, right. Nobody celebrates the clean parts of a floor with a dust ball on it. And this is, as I understand it, this is parenthood, the essence of it. I don't know, Dan, do you find that you are either someone's tech support or unpaid or vice versa?
All the time. Although as I'm getting older, I realize I'm not being asked as much because the technology is advancing and I'm trying to catch up. So I guess in our household, my wife's a little younger than I am, so I feel like I still get questions about tech support, which is gratifying. Let's put it that way. And but as I get older, it's less and less so. So. But we have to learn new things all the time. So I'm happy to try to keep up with the changing innovation and technology we see every day.
So Mim is that she's the person they ask what went wrong. You actually feel relevant, I'm hearing. You feel it at a time when the intuition behind half the platforms you use has just like radically changed overnight and you no longer know where to find stuff. The fact that you still get asked makes you feel it's like getting asked for directions in New York or something. You feel good and important and relevant.
Yeah. And I would say that, look, it's important to lean into these things too. So yes, there's trepidation when,
Dan has a new book. No, I'm just kidding. Yes.
Maybe one day. It's coming down the line. But I've realized that leaning into this stuff is actually very good because you kind of get over your fear of thinking, oh, it's just another thing I have to learn or pick up and maybe I won't be good at it. 10 times out of 10, like you lean into it, you figure it out, and then you realize it's not as half bad as you thought it was. And the advantage is that you picked up a new skill, new sort of a knowledge base, and then you can share it with your friends and family in the world.
So the win when you lean into figuring out something that you didn't know how to do is potent. But when you figure it out and it still doesn't work, I'm sorry. This is the frustration of modern life at its finest. I reinstalled the carburetor in the only gas-powered device that I own, which is a push mower, last weekend. And I took everything. I was so proud of myself that I put the pieces back in, right? This is like the Mac that I had for 20 years because I replaced all its innards. It still doesn't work. So I leaned in and fell over. Mim, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to say to Dan's point, I think we're all curious people. We all want to know how things work. Like, what's inside, what's powering whatever I use. And so as much as I am
I'm
a little
sorry,
bit...
I was on my phone. What did you say? No, I'm just kidding. I was being a non-curious person.
That tracks. Are you channeling one of my children right now? No. No,
the same ones that are mad when you're texting.
The same ones that are mad, yeah. But I think that there's a curiosity of like, I want to understand how it works. And so I want to know that I've tried everything. To your point, you took everything apart. You cleaned everything. So you're like, I did everything I could. And maybe it's just old. Like, right?
Right. But the curiosity really does hit a wall so I have an old HP printer that wouldn't suddenly stop connecting to my local Wi-Fi router. And I did everything. You know that menu where to get a digit or a letter, you have to just press the up arrow over and over. It's a Brother printer. That's the one, right? And
it's like one of those original cell phones where you have to like type in your text, right? So pressing the numbers.
Yeah. But even worse, there's no numbers. You only have an up arrow. So you're pressing that over and over to get to an L or an exclamation point or something in your password, right? And I'm like, so suddenly it sees all the routers in my entire apartment building but mine. And so finally I call Spectrum, and I get a real person after much striving. And that real person says to me, well, we're testing it on our end, and the only thing you can do is we're going to send you a new router, and that router is going to work with your 2.4 gigahertz device. They did, it worked, and then I couldn't return the old router. That's another story for another day. Suffice it to say that the punchline is that the person there at Spectrum finally helped me after their system had canceled all my appointments and check-ins rampantly, and say, oh yeah, this happens to me here every day.
Right. So technology is both a blessing and a curse. I mean,
Agreed.
I mean, the Amish lifestyle has some appeal. Not gonna lie. Like, as I say this on a podcast. No. But seriously, so what I wanted to do is actually,
kids, watch out.
Take that. I'll make you work the land in homemade overalls. You wish you had internet. No. Okay. Sorry. The good news is they don't listen to this. I don't know. Okay. Yeah. Here we go. Yeah. What I wanted to do is actually transition to introducing our guest, because he's a really interesting person who's in many ways an embodiment of what if instead through multiple points in his life, even to where he is now. So his name is Dan Lee, and he's joining us from Virginia. And he is a co-founder of a company called Yurahealth, which is an AI-powered agent that creates dashboards and manages dashboards to help people make better decisions about their healthcare, which we can all appreciate given how complicated healthcare is to navigate. And he's also running. So
this is AI that fights the system rather than just being the system. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we will find out more from Dan, but that is my understanding, that it is AI that is our friend, not trying to kill us, so, which I'm always a big fan of. And he's also running for Congress in his home state of Virginia in the 11th Congressional District. So we're going to talk today about his journey to get to this point of running for Congress, but also why he started Yurahealth and the other things he's done along the way. So thank you for joining us this morning, Dan.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to open with kind of your origin story. What led you to found Yurahealth? What led you to say, I want to run for Congress? And how are those two things connected?
So my career over the last 20 plus years has been in public service, and a common through line throughout that has been healthcare. So I've worked in the White House. I've advised the governor in Massachusetts. I was at the World Bank tackling global poverty issues. But throughout that journey, I've worked on health policy. I've worked on operations related to healthcare services and higher education. I've also been a caregiver myself in healthcare. So being a caregiver for my mom who has Parkinson's. That kind of led me to see healthcare and our healthcare system really kind of from multiple lenses, different perspectives. And one, it gave me appreciation for the complexity of it, but also it gave me the determination to try to solve some of the problems that exist in our healthcare system writ large. And with Yura specifically, it was the desire to actually get people in front of information that would help them make better informed decisions about their healthcare. And my belief was that one of the critical decisions about healthcare is the cost of our healthcare. Whether it's going to see your doctor, going to urgent care, getting a lab test or MRI or something a bit more complex, like maybe like a colonoscopy or surgery. And my concern is that the healthcare system that we live in today, it's a $5 trillion industry. I know that's a sort of almost like an imaginary number to think about, but it's over a fifth of our national GDP. And the question for me has always been, for all we spend on healthcare, what do we get in return for it? And the short answer is not very much.
So for listeners outside the U.S., I just wanted to say that for listeners outside of the U.S., keep in mind that what Dan's describing is health care in the United States, where we spend so much more. And Dan's asking, what do we get? And often we as the individual get hit with bills that, it's thousands of dollars just for a basic thing. I have someone who's shadowing me as an entrepreneur right now from the Netherlands who ended up needing root canal while she was in New York. And instead of paying for it in New York, she flew to Colombia to get it done and is saving a bunch of money.
That is extraordinary. And someone who's actually had a root canal in the last about 10 months, I can relate to that. I did not fly to Colombia. But it was an out-of-pocket expense that was unexpected, and it was a sizable one. But yes, healthcare is sort of backwards in many respects. But one way it's completely backwards is the fact that you get your healthcare service, procedure, test, or what have you, then 10 to 6 weeks later, after the fact, you'll get that surprise bill in the mail saying that, hey, by the way, even with your insurance, this is what you have to owe us, right? That is unlike any other sector in this country or even in the world where you get a service, you know what you're going to pay for that service ahead of time. So with Yura, the vision there was to provide price and quality transparency to the patient, to the consumer, such that even with your insurance, with a provider that's in network, right, where it's going to be the lowest out-of-pocket cost for you, in theory, you can shop around for if you need an MRI or an X-ray.
Let's take a second and just think about the full force of what you just said, Dan. So I love that you said in any other service this doesn't happen. So imagine, I don't know, going out for dinner or something, right? And 10 weeks later, you get this bill, right, for thousands of dollars because, I don't know, you ordered the oysters and they weren't covered by your bill that you paid at the restaurant, right? I just want listeners to think about just what a crazy notion this is, what you're describing, Dan. And so when you say that Yurahealth is going to shift this, let's imagine we're all there getting billed for dinner weeks and weeks later, sometimes for thousands of dollars for the oysters or something like that. What is Yura going to do to help solve our predicament?
Yeah. So what actually has enabled a company like Yura to exist was that about 5 years ago, there were some executive orders by the president at the time, which required every health insurance company in the country and pretty much every hospital in the country to publicly disclose their what are called contracted and negotiated rates between themselves and insurance companies. The reason why that's important is because whatever you have to pay after your insurance, your copay, your co-insurance, whatever it's applied to your deductible, is based on that contracted negotiated amount. So for example, if you were to walk into a hospital and say, hey, I need an MRI, right? My doctor ordered one. And if you don't have insurance, you'll be given what's called a cash rate, right? If you have insurance, your insurance provider and the hospital or the healthcare services provider has previously negotiated a special rate that if a patient comes in from off the street that has, say, Aetna or United Healthcare, we will only bill the insurance company X amount for that MRI. Those rates prior to 2020 were considered trade secret, so the public had no access to it. So post 2020.
Wait, this is amazing what you're saying. So I go to the doctor or the hospital, and there's a contractually negotiated, established rate for whatever I need. You mentioned an MRI earlier or some procedure. And up until recently, although that's a known negotiated number, it's considered a trade secret from me, the patient. Am I hearing you right, Dan?
That is 100% right. That is 100% right. And by executive order and by law in some states and almost at the federal level, that is no longer the case. But I can get into why that's also still problematic.
So I had a couple of questions I wanted to kind of put out there as you're talking about what Yurahealth is trying to do. So there are a couple of things that I think are pulling in the opposite direction of transparency, even as you're trying to bring more transparency to this sector. So one is the role of private equity in the sector and consolidation and buying up hospitals and buying up doctors' practices and in basically driving up rates and limiting services. And the reason I think that that's pulling in the opposite direction from what you're saying is there's only so much that patients can shop around if there's one hospital in town or there's one service provider that does the thing that they need to do. They have very limited options in terms of where else they would go if they're not in a position to travel, like long distances. So that's one piece. But then the second piece is, I remember reading this article probably 10 years ago about the charge master at the hospitals, sort of the secret number that hospitals not only charge to the insurance companies, but the amount that they decide, basically a very fancy managerial accounting exercise where they decide what each service costs. And so I guess my second question is, even if you are dealing with the transparency of here's what they agreed to pay your healthcare provider, there's still this other piece, which is what the hospital thinks it costs, and that's still a secret, right?
So with the new executive orders that have been around for the last 5 years, and in the time since then, some states actually passing laws to enforce price transparency, mimicking some of the federal guidelines. We're seeing more transparency, let's put it that way, around these things. However, it's been a challenge because as you can imagine, the healthcare industry, if it doesn't benefit them, they will, basically fight at every turn anything that goes against their own self-interest. So with price transparency, they will comply sometimes, but not necessarily comply in the spirit of state laws or the federal regulations. In other words, I'll give you an example. So United Healthcare, if you go to their website today, you can just Google United Healthcare price transparency. They will take you to a page on their website where they have disclosed, quote unquote, their contracting negotiated rates for pretty much every hospital, every provider they contract with nationally. And you can filter it by wherever you live. However, those files are in a format that most people cannot open themselves. It's called JSON. And they're typically, on average, several petabytes large. So massive files. So not much organization. They've simply dumped all this information on these websites. And then by doing so, they say they've complied with the regulations and the law. That is not transparency, obviously. This is why startups and companies like Yura have come into this space to take those files and then meaningfully clean them up, translate them, and then get them in front of consumers in ways that are a bit more consumer and user-friendly.
Dan, I love this point. Something's not accessible just because, in theory, if I could manage the petabytes and get through all the formats and data, I might be able to find the information, right? And so part of the innovation here that Yurahealth is bringing is to actually bring me as the patient, as the consumer, that information in a form that I can meaningfully use for decision making. Am I hearing you right?
You're spot on. And we want to make that experience not only easy, but hopefully enjoyable, such that, if you need to go, get a test that's prescribed by your doctor or procedure, you can come to us and ask us, maybe here's the CPT code, or, if you just want to use natural language, I need an MRI for my shoulder, MRI for my knee. And then based on your health insurance, we can tell you, what is that out-of-pocket cost going to be? What is the amount that you would get in that bill 6 to 10 weeks later in the mail, but know that beforehand, such that you can decide whether you should get that procedure at X facility or Y facility, both of whom are in network with your insurance. But because there are different facilities with different contracted rates or different facility types.
Right. So back to my silly example, it might be that I could order the oysters or the other, I don't really order oysters. I could order the shrimp or the calamari on the menu, right? And if I order the shrimp, it's going to end up being $20. And if I order the calamari, it's going to end up being $2,000. I'm giving extreme numbers on purpose. And I don't know when I'm ordering which it is.
See, I would actually say it's more like what if you went to a different location of that same restaurant? And then if you had the choice, if I could have this meal at restaurant and the location in the downtown district, or I could have it in the outskirts, and it's cheaper if I go to the outskirts. There's a dollar menu at the one Mickey D's, and unbeknownst to me, there's the big prefix at the other. Yeah.
Exactly. And I would actually take that one step further and say two things. One is, yes, it's like going to, say, a McDonald's and you order a Big Mac, but down the street, the same McDonald's, maybe it's a different franchisee, same Big Mac will cost 2-3 times more for whatever reason. That is the analogy of our healthcare system today. And by the way, in some cases, not many, but enough to be worried about, it's like going to a restaurant, say a fast casual place. It's like you're going to Chipotle for a burrito, but you're also being expected to pay 3-star Michelin prices for a burrito. Makes no sense, right? I think we all know that the healthcare in this country is, in some cases, outrageously or comically expensive.
Yeah. Healthcare in the U.S. is a comically expensive burrito. This is my takeaway so far.
I mean, this is one of the things. So I'm in academia and I work for a state university, but this is one of the things that's an incredible benefit of my job, is the benefit of being in the state buying pool for health insurance. So is it expensive? Yes, but far less than it would be if I worked for a private employer in my state. So it's quite an incentive for a lot of faculty to join. I mean, it's like, here we are, right?
I'm experiencing the other side of that. Though I want to pull back the camera for a second. Dan, I could nerd out on how Yurahealth does this for the next 3 hours and just be getting curious. But I just want to think about the fact that this is what if instead. And you've asked, what if instead I knew how much the procedure I'm about to get cost and whether it was the $1 Big Mac, or the $100 Big Mac. I'm using fake numbers here. But you're also, and this is amazing to me, you're also asking, what if instead things work differently in the state of Virginia and the United States? And so maybe you could talk with us about how you're like a superhero who's, about to leave the X-Men and then go on the Avengers, make sure the X-Men are still doing well. All right. Like, talk to us. And actually, if I could just say this much, I got a message from a colleague who actually works at this university in exile where folks from Belarus study in another country. All right. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say who it is without her permission, but she wrote me this morning and she said, it's important. I'm thinking about the relationship between social entrepreneurship, where people solve problems the way you are to make an impact, to solve a social problem, and democracy and engagement and participation. Can you talk to us about these sides of the way you're trying to ask, what if instead it worked differently?
Yes, and if my response gets a little more on the political side, please feel free to just kind of pause or wave your hands, and we can bring it back to the core.
I actually love the way you're not a classic, a career politician. You're clearly someone who's trying to say this system, it's broken. It's not responding to our needs. It doesn't even let me make good decisions as a patient, as a consumer. And you're also applying that to the way things work in your government. So please talk to us about how you got there and what problems you're trying to solve on that side.
And I think to help answer that, I'll take one mini step backwards and provide some context for kind of where we are as a nation today. Last year, I was a canvasser for Harris for president, and I was down in Georgia, knocking on doors, getting out the vote. And we were obviously optimistic as for myself, I'm part of the Democratic Party, optimistic that we might have our first woman president, South Asian descent, in the White House. Obviously, that did not happen. And in retrospect, the concern I think I and others have had and still do have today is that Democrats, our party, simply was not quite aligned with the rest of the country. In other words, voters were not buying what Democrats were selling. And the concerns that most Americans have today are, what can I do? What can I have to ensure that I can not only live, but thrive in this nation? Mm-hmm. And I think it's those issues that we should be focused on. And frankly, every politician should be focused on. But
now break that down for a second. In what ways have we been out of touch with that desire to not just live, but thrive that you want to address? Keep going.
Yeah, it goes back to issues around affordability, the so-called kitchen table issues, right? Should we have to choose between making rent or paying for our visit to the doctor? Should we have to choose between buying our groceries for the week or paying for our medications? I would say that's
in many ways, hard no. That's not that far off from the problem you were solving at Yurahealth. It sounds like a totally different thing to have a tech company and to run for office. But the kitchen table issue is the problem you're addressing in both cases, correct?
It is. And I'll give you one other kind of example maybe we haven't touched on, which is when I worked in Boston, I was advising a governor up there. My job was to work with our state agencies in Boston and in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to improve public service delivery. And what does that mean? It meant that we help the trains run on time so that people get to their jobs, right? It meant that people who received unemployment checks could get them on time so they could make rent and pay groceries. And it also meant that people who had to, say, renew their driver's licenses at the DMV didn't have to wait 2-3 hours to get some basic service they needed, right? We brought that down to 30 to 45 minutes on average. It's these critical services or fundamental services that people rely on a daily basis that our governments, whether they're local, state, or federal, should be delivering. And it's that relentless focus that we had that enabled us to actually create a model for what government can do well. And we need that same model applied nationally, hopefully at scale.
So I want to follow up on that, for anybody who's not familiar with our current political climate, it's hyper partisan. It's deeply entrenched on both sides. Like, given that, what made you say, yeah, I'll throw my hat in the ring and I'll get in there and I'll try to fight for infrastructure and public services and transparency, given all the things happening kind of on the edges that aren't even policy related?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what I had been doing was channeling that anxiety and angst and fear that I had into campaigning for candidates that I believed in. And I've campaigned for Democrats up and down the ballot, nationally, locally, at our state level here in Virginia. And I realized ultimately that the problem that we have with our party and our kind of the political system is that we keep electing and sending the same types of people cut from the same cloth into elected office. And they treat these positions as seats they should just keep warm for the next 10, 20, 30 years, rather than using these as platforms to bring about the change that voters brought them in the first place. Every vote in Congress matters. One vote can make the difference between doing something right and doing something wrong for our country. And as we saw a few weeks ago, one vote caused that big, beautiful bill, which now will put about 11 million Medicaid recipients at risk. That vote was critical, and we lost it. So for me, I'm running such that one vote in Congress is a vote for guaranteed access to healthcare in this country for every American. For me, that one vote will be access to a livable federal minimum wage. And that one vote will be access to affordable dependent care for kids and seniors. Now, having been a caregiver myself, I can tell you, and anyone who has been a caregiver listening to this, we all know it's hard. And that is an understatement. For a country like ours, we have to make sure that we provide these things. Because, by the way, these are not just nice things to have. These are essential to our right to exist.
So I guess two things. So one is the Medicaid thing is a huge issue because, as you know, it's not just the people who are on Medicaid who are at risk of losing services. It's hospitals who could be forced to close because they're not getting Medicaid money. And in some places, in rural parts of this country, they're the only hospital around. So we're creating healthcare deserts potentially for people, which means, you guys know, reduced access to care, more people getting sicker, more people dying. I mean, it's kind of terrifying, some of these changes. But to go back to your point of like the one vote, that's all true, except there very often one side just doesn't have the votes to get the thing passed. And I guess my question is a more broad question about building coalitions, because it seems like there are clusters of people interested in building coalitions around issues, and clusters of people who are like, I want to get likes on social media, and I want to get notoriety, and I want to raise money, and I want to stay in my position by being as loud and as extreme and attention grabbing as possible. And so, like, can you talk a little bit about that sort of coalition building piece and how you see yourself playing a role in it?
Coalitions are critical. Absolutely. We need to have a tent that brings in as many folks as possible. What's even more important, I would argue, is that we need Americans to participate in the process. And what I mean by that is we need people to actually show up and vote. And you ask, well, most people say, well, we do vote. We vote in November during the elections. What actually needs to happen is people need to vote in primary elections, because these primary elections determine, as you know, the nominees for either party, which then compete in the November general elections. And just a bit of an insider baseball here with politics, primary elections and general elections are almost completely different types of elections, in the sense that they bring out different types of voters. So the most diehard, lefties or diehard righties, which are a very small number, are the ones that will consistently and vote in these primary elections. They know exactly when these happen, and they vote, and they bring their friends and family to vote for their issues. Because of the such lower turnout, these people actually have, they're very vocal about their issues. And the candidates who run in these primaries, whether, give them a spectrum of folks who are progressive or conservative or someone in the middle, they will essentially cater to these types of voters, such that it leads to the polarization that we have today in our political system. So by the time we've got these sort of real left to real right candidates who come out of these primaries ending up in the November elections or general elections in the fall, the choice is pretty stark. It's really one side or the other, in the most kind of extreme sense. To help solve that, it's a simple solution. It's a hard one. We need more people to participate, because unless they participate, their voices won't be heard. and they won't be represented.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because if you have one thing, and I promise I'll give you the floor, Alejandro. So as you increase participation, you end up with more moderate candidates because they have to appeal to a wider cross section of people. And so there's some of this hyper partisanship that I think begins to erode as participation goes up. Like in the countries that you see that require people to vote, you have far fewer extreme candidates. I'm not saying we should require people to vote. I wouldn't go because but I think you're right about broadening participation in the process.
You really strike me to this point about broadening participation. And we talk about the type of person who sees themselves as participating in politics more than every 4 years. The type of person that runs for office. When I first spoke with you and was hearing about Yurahealth, I admit it didn't occur to me to think of you, the social tech entrepreneur, right? That kind of person as also the kind of person that's going to go and run for office. And you're saying it's not just the kind of person who runs, but the kind of person who volunteers and gets involved. I admit, I think of the people who staff my local polling place, the people who are out there canvassing as a type of person. And I even am tempted to feel like, yeah, what's that really going to do? And so when I hear you saying we have to rethink, you use this metaphor of the tent, right? Not just who's, in the tent or putting up the tent, but who even shows up at the campsite, it really gives me pause. In the same conversation earlier today over email with my colleague, her name is Natalia Mikhailova, who's a professor at European Humanities University, we were just thinking together about civic engagement and its relationship with the entrepreneurial, the problem solver mindset. And we ended up looking up a piece by a guy called Meyer, who was asking why, he had been around during the rise of the Nazis. And he was asking, what could he have done? And why didn't he do anything? And he says this piece that really cut me to the quick. It says, each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the next and then the next. You wait for one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when such a shock comes, will join you in resisting somehow. You don't want to act or even talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. Why not? Well, you're not in the habit of doing it. And this really made me think, because you're saying we got to get in that habit fast. And you're saying it's not them, it's us that need to be in that habit. So I wish we could talk with you all day and would love to have you on for a follow-up on many of these topics where we've just scratched the surface. But as we connect these questions about participation, about kitchen table issues and having the information to know how much my healthcare is going to cost versus participating in our democracy and having an influence in the cost of everyday life, making everyday life just possible for regular people. So can you just take a few minutes and talk to us as a What If Instead person? Is Yurahealth continuing its thing as you run your campaign? And what would you say to regular people listening to this podcast, thinking to themselves, I'm not that person, what can I do?
Well, I would say that I was that person at one point, right? Who am I? I'm the son of working class immigrants who came from South Korea and landed in the U.S., ultimately in Virginia, to start a new life. I had no business after graduating college being a junior staffer in the White House. Absolutely no business. I had no business advising a governor in Massachusetts. That was not my background. But for each of these roles,
to do that, Dan.
Well, no one tells you, right? But most people will tell you, well, maybe that's not for you. Usually that's the message you often get, right? Well, maybe it's not for you, right? Either it's direct or indirect. But at every turn of my life, both personal and professional, it's always been what if, to your point, what if I tried this? What if healthcare could be different? What if we provided this service just a little bit better or a little bit different? What could the impact be? And from what I've seen with my own eyes, time and time again, the courage to just lean in and really sometimes step over the cliff into trying something that has been done before, which is the story of every startup, by the way. Every startup shouldn't exist until it does, right? Unless it would have been already in existence in the first place if it were. So there's a risk that one takes to go out and challenge the status quo. But it's often the biggest moments that we've seen in terms of change and progress in our country, our species maybe, is that we
Mm-hmm.
all of us have taken risks and asked ourselves and then tried to do something
Mm-hmm.
differently. And that's been the inspiration for me personally. And it's why I'm in this race now. Because I'll tell you very
Mm-hmm.
bluntly, right now, our leaders in the party have absolutely no idea. No idea. So let's lead with some courage and conviction, and let's just put some, lines in the sand and say, hey, for the richest country on earth, me being a healthcare guy, no one, absolutely no one, should have to die for not being able to afford healthcare. And conversely, people shouldn't have to take on such amounts of medical and dental debt. There are 40% of Americans who have some form of medical and dental debt. And the leading cause of personal bankruptcy is still unpaid medical bills. That is just absolutely wrong. We have to change that.
So I love all of this. One sort of weird synchronicity that I want to point out is one of the things that I've heard from Dan throughout this conversation is, people weren't expecting him to do these things, but he did them. And we have to stop looking in the usual places for the problem solvers. And then the third thing is you just get better at doing the work by doing the work. Like you had no business being a junior staffer, but you learned how to be a junior staffer, which led you to get to the next job, which you quote unquote had no business doing, which led you to get to the next thing and the next thing. So one of these weird synchronicity things is this is exactly what Alejandro and I write about in our book of how we think about social innovation in general and more broadly, of stop looking in the usual places for the usual suspects. And basically you get good at it by doing it. You just have to get your hands dirty and get out there and do it. So I love this. And spoiler, full disclosure, Dan has not read our book. So he hit these themes and he wasn't primed or anything. But it's just kind of a nice synchronicity. Fully support all this innovation work
Yeah.
you're doing.
Dan, your use of the teleprompter is consummate. But seriously, this is very powerful to me, and these are very live, urgent issues for me as a person. And it's very powerful what the two of you have just said. The antidote to imposter syndrome is not suddenly stopping feeling like an imposter, it's doing it. Because once you notice yourself doing it, then you're doing it. You gave this wonderful statement, Dan, where you said, every startup shouldn't have existed. Everyone that becomes the world we think it is. And so I love that what you've said, that the impetus is it just shouldn't work this way. It just shouldn't put us in debt, make us go broke, just to have our health taken care of. It just shouldn't work this way. I'm not going to wait around for somebody else to fix that, because they're not. It's time for us to do so. If you could ask, Dan, our listeners to look something up, we'll put your websites on the episode, or do something. Give them a first thing they could do, and don't say get out and vote. We know that, right? Is there something, one or two things maybe, whether it's engaging civically or solving a problem or getting involved, that folks can do who are listening to what you've just said?
Absolutely. And it's the simplest step. Go out and volunteer in your community. Just go out, find an organization, whether it's a nonprofit, in a field that may interest you, or maybe it's a field that's completely different. Volunteer. Whether it's a soup kitchen, volunteer for, be a big brother, big sister. Getting involved in your community is something that I think most people aspire to do, but sometimes just never get around to it. Volunteering can literally just mean you're picking up trash on your street corner and doing something good for your community. So that first step is sometimes the hardest step, but once you take it, I guarantee you, you'll never look back.
Dan Lee, co-founder of Yurahealth and candidate for the U.S. Congress in Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us here on What If Instead.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.